She never spoke to anyone on the plane. Passengers thought she was shy or sad. But when the pilot suddenly collapsed at 30,000 feet and panic filled the cabin, her legendary military call sign would save everyone aboard. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The woman in seat 12A had not spoken a single word since boarding Flight 447 from Chicago to Denver. Not to the flight attendant who offered her a beverage. Not to the businessman beside her who tried making small talk about the weather. Not even a simple thank you when the elderly man across the aisle helped her place her small black bag in the overhead bin. Sarah Chin, the lead flight attendant, noticed her immediately. 20 years of flying had taught Sarah to read passengers quickly. This woman was different. She wore simple dark clothes, black jeans, a plain gray sweater, and worn leather boots. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She carried herself with perfect posture, but there was something in her eyes that made people look away after a moment. Maybe she's dealing with a loss, whispered Jenny, the junior flight attendant, as they prepared drinks in the galley. She looks so sad. Sarah shook her head. Not sad. Just focused. Like she's thinking about something important. The woman, her ticket read A. Mitchell, had checked in online and printed her boarding pass at home. She'd walked straight to her seat without stopping at the gift shops or restaurants. When passengers around her tried to strike up conversations, she would simply nod politely and return to staring out the window. The businessman in 12B, Tom Rodriguez, had given up trying to talk to her after 3 attempts. Probably going through a divorce, he muttered to his wife. Or maybe she just hates flying. What none of them knew was that Lieutenant Colonel Alex Mitchell had very good reasons for staying silent. For the past 15 years, she had been one of the military's most classified assets. Her missions were so secret that most people in the Pentagon didn't know she existed. She had flown combat missions over 3 different war zones, saved countless lives, and earned medals that would never be displayed publicly. Even on civilian flights, Alex maintained operational security. She never revealed personal information to strangers. Never discussed her work. Never let her guard down. The habits that kept her alive in combat zones had become second nature in civilian life. As Flight 447 climbed to its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, Alex finally relaxed slightly. The takeoff had been smooth. The weather was clear. In 2 hours, she would be in Denver for her sister's wedding, one of the few family events important enough to pull her away from her duties. She closed her eyes and tried to push away thoughts of her last mission. 3 weeks ago, she had led a rescue operation behind enemy lines that had gone wrong. 2 of her squadron members had barely made it home. The review board said she'd made the right calls, but Alex still saw their faces when she tried to sleep. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence and Alex's eyes snapped open. Her body automatically tensed, ready for action. But it was just normal air travel. She forced herself to relax again. Around her, passengers settled in for the routine flight. Business travelers opened their laptops. Families shared snacks. The elderly couple in row 10 held hands while looking through a photo album. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that one of the military's most dangerous missions was sitting quietly among them. Captain James Morrison had been flying commercial aircraft for 32 years. He'd started with small regional planes and worked his way up to commanding the big jets. Flight 447 was routine, clear skies, good weather at both airports, and an aircraft that was running perfectly. In the cockpit, he chatted easily with his co-pilot, First Officer David Park. Park was young but skilled, with 5 years of commercial flying experience. They discussed the flight path, checked their instruments, and made small talk about their families. "My daughter's soccer team made it to the state finals," Morrison said as they leveled off at cruising altitude. "I promised I'd be there Saturday if we don't get delayed anywhere." Park smiled. "That's great, Captain. How old is she?" 14. "Been playing since she was 6. Gets her competitive spirit from her mother, thank God." The cabin was peaceful. Most passengers had settled in with books, tablets, or were trying to nap. Sarah Chin and her crew moved through the aisles, serving drinks and answering the occasional question. Sarah stopped by row 12 again. The silent woman was staring out the window at the clouds below. "Would you like anything to drink, miss?" Sarah asked quietly. The woman turned and gave a small shake of her head, then returned to the window. Sarah noticed something she'd missed before, a small scar along the woman's jawline, and another on her left hand. Not accident scars. These looked deliberate, like they came from dangerous situations. But Sarah didn't press. Some passengers wanted to be left alone and she respected that. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison was explaining some of the finer points of high-altitude flying to Park. The thing about flying at this altitude is that everything happens faster if something goes wrong. Less air, less time to react. That's why we train so much for emergencies. Park nodded. He'd heard similar lectures from other senior pilots. What's the worst emergency you've had to handle? Morrison thought for a moment. Engine failure over the Rockies about 10 years ago. Had to make an emergency landing in Grand Junction with a full passenger load. Everyone was fine, but it got exciting for a few minutes. Neither pilot noticed the subtle change in Captain Morrison's breathing. The slight tightness in his chest that had started an hour ago was getting worse. He attributed it to the coffee he'd had before takeoff. Sometimes it made him feel anxious. In the cabin, Alex Mitchell continued her silent watch. She'd noticed the slight changes in engine sound that indicated they were at cruising altitude. She'd observed the flight attendants' routines and mentally mapped the exits and safety equipment. Old habits from a lifetime of being ready for anything. A small child in row 8 started crying, and Alex found herself automatically calculating the best way to calm a distressed civilian, another habit from her military service. But she stayed in her seat, maintaining her cover. The businessman next to her was working on a spreadsheet, occasionally glancing her way as if hoping she might finally say something. She could feel his curiosity but ignored it. In her line of work, curiosity from strangers was often dangerous. What Alex didn't know was that in exactly 17 minutes, her carefully maintained silence would be broken forever. Captain Morrison set down his coffee cup and rubbed his chest. The tightness was getting worse, and now there was a sharp pain shooting down his left arm. He tried to convince himself it was just stress, but his flight training kicked in. When something felt wrong, you took it seriously. "Dave," he said to his co-pilot, "I'm feeling a bit." The words died in his throat as a crushing pain exploded across his chest. Morrison gasped and clutched at his shirt, his face going pale. The pain was so intense he couldn't breathe. "Captain?" Park spun in his seat as Morrison slumped forward, his body going limp. "Captain Morrison." Park's training took over. He immediately took control of the aircraft, then reached for Morrison's pulse. It was weak and irregular. This was a medical emergency at 37,000 feet with 180 passengers on board. He grabbed the intercom microphone with shaking hands. "Flight attendants to the cockpit immediately. We have a medical emergency." In the cabin, passengers looked up in alarm as Sarah Chin rushed toward the cockpit. The tension in the co-pilot's voice made it clear this wasn't a minor issue. Sarah entered the cockpit and gasped when she saw Captain Morrison unconscious in his seat. "What happened?" "Heart attack, I think," Park said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I need you to call for a doctor among the passengers and get the medical kit. I have to fly the plane." Sarah nodded and hurried back to the cabin. She grabbed the intercom microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any doctors or medical personnel on board, please identify yourselves to the flight crew immediately." A murmur of concern rippled through the cabin. Passengers began looking around, whispering to each other. Two people raised their hands, a nurse from Denver and a retired paramedic. But Park knew that even with medical help, their situation was desperate. Captain Morrison was the senior pilot with decades of experience. Park had never handled an emergency landing of this magnitude by himself. His hands were shaking as he radioed air traffic control. "Denver Center, this is United 447. We have a medical emergency. The captain is unconscious. Requesting immediate vectors to the nearest airport and emergency medical assistance on the ground." The air traffic controller's voice came back calm and professional. "United 447, we copy your medical emergency. The nearest suitable airport is Colorado Springs, about 80 miles southwest of your position. Are you able to continue the approach?" Park stared at his instruments. Landing a commercial airliner was complicated under normal circumstances. With an unconscious captain and 180 lives depending on him, it felt impossible. "Denver Center, I'm going to need assistance. The captain is incapacitated and I'm not sure I can handle the landing procedures alone." In the cabin, passengers were beginning to panic as they overheard the radio transmissions. Mothers pulled their children closer. Business travelers put away their laptops and gripped their armrests. Alex Mitchell heard every word. In her seat by the window, she remained perfectly still, but her mind was now fully engaged. She'd been in situations like this before, not exactly like this but close enough. Her training told her to assess the situation, identify the resources available, and determine the best course of action. The co-pilot was young and scared. The captain was down. The nearest airport was still 80 miles away. And 180 people were counting on a pilot who clearly didn't believe he could handle the situation alone. Alex made her decision. Alex Mitchell unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. For the first time since boarding, she moved with purpose instead of the careful, controlled movements she'd maintained as a civilian passenger. Tom Rodriguez, the businessman beside her, looked up in surprise. "Miss, I think we're supposed to stay seated during?" "Excuse me," Alex said quietly. These were her first words of the flight, and her voice carried an authority that made Tom immediately step aside. Alex walked toward the front of the aircraft, ignoring the concerned looks from other passengers. Sarah Chen was coming out of the cockpit with the medical kit when Alex approached her. "I need to speak with your co-pilot," Alex said calmly. Sarah looked confused. "Miss, we have medical personnel looking at the captain. Please return to your seat." "I'm not medical personnel," Alex replied. "I'm a pilot." Sarah's eyes widened. In all the chaos, she hadn't thought to ask if any qualified pilots were on board. Are you current? Can you help?" Instead of answering, Alex stepped into the cockpit. First Officer Park was struggling with approach calculations while trying to monitor the captain's condition. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "Officer Park," Alex said quietly. "I'm qualified to assist." Park turned, hope and desperation in his eyes. "Are you a commercial pilot? Do you know this aircraft?" "I know aircraft," Alex said simply. "What's your situation?" Park quickly explained their position, the captain's condition, and his concerns about handling the emergency landing. As he spoke, Alex's eyes scanned the instrument panel, automatically processing altitude, airspeed, fuel levels, and engine performance. "You're doing fine," she said calmly. "But you're going to need help with the approach procedures. Have you declared a full emergency with ATC?" "Medical emergency, but not a full emergency," Park admitted. Alex reached for the radio microphone. "Denver Center, this is United 447. We're declaring a full emergency. Captain incapacitated, first officer at controls, requesting priority handling and emergency equipment standing by." Her voice was so calm and professional that the air traffic controller immediately responded with increased attention. "United 447, emergency status confirmed. You have priority handling. Can you advise your qualifications for assistance?" Alex hesitated for just a moment. Once she answered this question, her cover would be blown forever. But 180 lives were more important than her operational security. "Denver Center, this is Razor." There was a long pause on the radio. Then the controller's voice came back, noticeably different. "Did you say Razor? Confirm your call sign." "Affirmative. Call sign Razor." In the air traffic control center, the controller turned to his supervisor with wide eyes. Everyone in military aviation knew that call sign. Razor was a legend, one of the most decorated combat pilots in recent history, known for impossible rescue missions and flying in conditions that would ground other pilots. The supervisor took over the radio. "Razor, this is Denver Center Supervisor. We have your reputation on file. How can we assist?" First Officer Park stared at Alex in amazement. He'd never heard of the call sign Razor, but the reaction from air traffic control made it clear this woman was someone very special. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what exactly is your background?" Alex was already studying the approach charts for Colorado Springs Airport. "Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force. Special Operations. 15 years of combat flying." Park's mouth fell open. "Combat flying? What kind of aircraft?" "F-16s, F-22s, rescue helicopters, transport planes, and a few things that are still classified," Alex said matter-of-factly. "This is just a big, slow transport plane with more passengers than I usually carry." The radio crackled again. "Razor, Denver Center. We've contacted Cheyenne Mountain and Peterson Air Force Base. They're scrambling emergency equipment and standing by to assist. What do you need from us?" Alex keyed the microphone. "Denver Center, we need a straight-in approach to Colorado Springs, runway 17R. Clear all other traffic and have medical standing by for the captain. We'll need fire and rescue equipment as a precaution, but I expect a normal landing." "Copy that, Razor. You have the airport to yourself. All emergency equipment is rolling." In the cabin, word was spreading among the passengers that someone qualified was helping in the cockpit. The panic was starting to subside, replaced by cautious hope. Sarah Chen made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a qualified pilot assisting our first officer. We're being diverted to Colorado Springs for medical attention for our captain. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But passengers were whispering among themselves, trying to figure out who the mysterious helper was. The businessman from 12B, Tom Rodriguez, suddenly realized the silent woman who'd been sitting next to him had disappeared. "That's her," he said to his wife. "The woman who wouldn't talk to anyone. She's the pilot." In the cockpit, Alex was working with Park to set up the approach. Her military training was different from commercial procedures, but the basic principles were the same. More importantly, she had experience making difficult landings under pressure. "The key is to stay calm and work through each step systematically," she told Park. "You know how to fly this aircraft. I'm just here to back you up and handle communications." Park nodded, feeling more confident with Alex beside him. "Have you ever landed a commercial airliner before?" "No," Alex admitted. "But I've landed cargo planes in combat zones with engines on fire and hydraulics failing. This is actually easier. We have working engines, good weather, and a nice long runway." She keyed the radio again. "Denver Center Razor. Request you patch us through to United Airlines dispatch. They need to be aware of our situation and passenger count." "Roger, Razor. Connecting you now." The United Airlines dispatcher came on the frequency, and Alex quickly briefed him on their situation. The dispatcher confirmed that Alex's actions were authorized under emergency protocols and that the company would support whatever decisions she made. As they began their descent toward Colorado Springs, Alex found herself thinking about all the flights she'd made in combat zones. Night missions over hostile territory, rescue operations in terrible weather, transport runs under enemy fire. Those flights had prepared her for moments like this. But there was something different about this mission. In combat, she was responsible for her crew and maybe a few special operations soldiers. Today, she was helping to save 180 innocent civilians' families, children, elderly passengers who had trusted their lives to commercial aviation. The weight of that responsibility was both heavier and more meaningful than anything she'd carried in military service. As Flight 447 began its descent toward Colorado Springs Airport, Alex took charge of the radio communications while First Officer Park focused on flying the aircraft. Her calm, professional voice made everything sound routine, even though they were dealing with an unprecedented emergency. "Colorado Springs Tower, United 447 with Razor assisting. We have the airport in sight, requesting straight-in approach runway 17R. United 447, Colorado Springs Tower. You're cleared for straight-in approach runway 17R. Wind calm, visibility unlimited. All emergency equipment is standing by." In the cabin, passengers pressed their faces to the windows as the Rocky Mountains came into view. Some were praying. Others held hands with strangers. Everyone understood that the next 20 minutes would determine whether they lived or died. Sarah Chin and her crew had done everything possible to prepare for an emergency landing. They'd briefed passengers on brace positions, identified able-bodied helpers near the exits, and moved everyone away from the wing sections in case of fire. But Sarah kept thinking about the silent woman who had revealed herself as their salvation. How had she known this passenger was a pilot? What kind of pilot earned that much respect from air traffic controllers? In the cockpit, Alex was teaching Park advanced approach techniques she'd learned in military service. "The key is energy management," she explained as they descended through 10,000 feet. "We want to be just a little high and a little fast, then bleed off the excess energy gradually. That gives us options if something goes wrong." Park nodded, concentrating intensely. With Alex beside him, the approach felt manageable instead of terrifying. Her confidence was infectious. "Razor," came a new voice on the radio. "This is Colonel Mitchell, Peterson Air Force Base Operations. Are you related to Major Patricia Mitchell, class of '95? Alex smiled slightly. "That's my sister, Colonel. She's getting married this weekend. Small world. She's going to have quite a story to tell at her wedding. Everyone here is following your flight. You're doing great." The radio chatter was being monitored by news agencies, and word was beginning to spread about the mysterious military pilot who had emerged from anonymity to save a commercial flight. But Alex was focused entirely on the task at hand. At 5,000 feet they could see Colorado Springs Airport clearly. Fire trucks and ambulances were lined up along the runway, their red lights flashing. It looked serious and intimidating, but Alex had seen much worse. "United 447, you're 5 miles from the runway, looking perfect. Maintain your approach speed." Alex keyed the microphone. "Tower Razor. We'll need medical personnel to meet us at the gate for the captain, but otherwise this should be a normal landing." She turned to Park. "You're doing great. Just like a training flight. Keep your speed steady, watch your glide path, and let the aircraft do what it's designed to do. Park's hands were steady on the controls now. The approach was going exactly as planned. "I can't believe how calm you are," he said. "Aren't you nervous?" "Terrified," Alex replied honestly. "But being scared doesn't change what needs to be done. The aircraft doesn't care if we're nervous. It just needs to be flown correctly." At 1,000 feet, everything was perfect. Speed, altitude, glide path, all exactly where they needed to be. The runway was growing larger in the windscreen. 500 feet, Alex called out, monitoring their descent. "Looking good." The passengers felt the aircraft getting lower. Some closed their eyes. Others watched out the windows as the ground rushed up to meet them. 100 feet, Alex announced. "Flare, now." Park pulled back gently on the controls, and Flight 447 touched down smoothly on runway 17R. The passengers burst into applause as the aircraft rolled to a stop, surrounded by emergency vehicles with lights flashing. They had made it. As Flight 447 came to a complete stop, emergency medical personnel rushed aboard to attend to Captain Morrison. He was unconscious but stable, and the paramedics quickly prepared him for transport to the nearest hospital. In the cockpit, First Officer Park was shaking with relief and adrenaline. "I can't believe we did it," he said to Alex. "I couldn't have managed that alone." Alex was already shutting down systems and completing post-flight procedures. Even in an emergency, proper protocols mattered. "You did fine," she told Park. "You kept your head and flew the aircraft. That's what counted." Airport officials and airline representatives were boarding the aircraft, along with reporters who had heard about the dramatic emergency landing. But Alex wanted to avoid the attention. She'd spent her entire career staying out of the spotlight. Sarah Chin approached the cockpit. "Ma'am, everyone wants to thank you. The passengers, the airline, the airport officials. You saved all our lives." Alex shook her head. "Officer Park saved your lives. I just helped with the radio calls." But Sarah wasn't fooled. She'd seen how Alex had taken command of the situation, how air traffic controllers had responded to her call sign, how her presence had transformed a panicked first officer into a confident pilot. In the cabin, passengers were gathering their belongings and talking excitedly about their brush with disaster. Tom Rodriguez, who had been sitting next to Alex, was telling everyone who would listen about the mysterious silent woman. "She didn't say a word for 2 hours," he explained to a reporter. "Not one word. Then the pilot collapsed and suddenly she's talking to air traffic control like she owns the sky." Alex tried to slip off the aircraft quietly, but a crowd had gathered at the gate. Airport officials, airline executives, military personnel from nearby Peterson Air Force Base, and a growing group of reporters and cameras. Colonel Patricia Mitchell, Alex's sister, had driven down from Denver when she heard about the emergency. She pushed through the crowd and grabbed Alex in a fierce hug. "You missed your own rehearsal dinner to save a plane full of strangers," Patricia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "The wedding is tomorrow," Alex replied. "I'll be there." A reporter pushed forward with a microphone. "Colonel Mitchell, can you tell us about your background? How does a passenger happen to have the skills to land a commercial airliner?" Alex looked uncomfortable with the attention. First Officer Park landed the aircraft. "I just assisted with communications." But Colonel Johnson from Peterson Air Force Base stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand who you're talking to. Call sign Razor is one of the most decorated combat pilots in Air Force history. She's flown missions that are still classified, saved lives in places we can't even tell you about." The crowd pressed closer, but Alex was already moving toward the exit. She'd spent 15 years avoiding this kind of publicity. Her missions required secrecy, and she wasn't comfortable being in the spotlight. "I need to get to Denver," she told Patricia quietly. "Can we leave?" As they walked toward Patricia's car, Alex reflected on the day's events. Her carefully maintained cover was blown forever. By tomorrow, her face would be on every news channel and her call sign would be known to every aviation enthusiast in the country. But 180 people were alive who might not have been. Captain Morrison was getting the medical treatment he needed. First Officer Park had proven he could handle a crisis when it mattered most. Sometimes Alex thought the mission was worth the cost. The story of Flight 447 spread across news networks within hours. "Silent Hero Saves Commercial Flight," read the headlines. "Mysterious military pilot emerges from passenger seat to land disabled aircraft." But the media couldn't get the full story because most of Alex Mitchell's service record was classified. They knew she was Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Razor Mitchell, that she had 15 years of distinguished service, and that she was considered one of the finest combat pilots of her generation. Beyond that, military officials weren't talking. What they didn't report was her role in Operation Desert Storm, where she'd flown close air support missions that saved hundreds of ground troops. They couldn't mention her classified missions over hostile territory, or the rescue operation where she'd landed a damaged helicopter in a combat zone to evacuate wounded soldiers. The call sign Razor had been earned during her first combat deployment, when she demonstrated an ability to make split-second decisions with surgical precision. Her commanding officers said she could thread the eye of a needle at 500 miles per hour. At Patricia's house in Denver, Alex was trying to avoid the media circus. Reporters had gathered outside, hoping for an exclusive interview with the hero pilot. But Alex had more important things on her mind. "How's Captain Morrison?" she asked Patricia as they watched the news coverage. "Stable condition at Colorado Springs Hospital. Triple bypass surgery scheduled for tomorrow. He's expected to make a full recovery." Alex nodded. That was what mattered most. Morrison had a family, probably grandchildren. His life was worth more than her anonymity. Her phone had been ringing constantly. Requests for interviews, speaking engagements, book deals, movie rights. Alex ignored them all. She'd never sought fame or fortune from her military service, and she wasn't going to start now. The wedding rehearsal had been postponed, but Patricia didn't mind. "Having my sister save a planeload of people is a pretty good excuse for being late," she joked. But Alex was struggling with the attention. For 15 years, her survival had depended on remaining invisible, on never drawing attention to herself or her capabilities. Now her face was on television screens across the country. "It's going to be different now," Patricia said gently. "People are going to recognize you. Want to shake your hand, buy you drinks, hear your stories." Alex looked out the window at the reporters. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to serve my country and do my job." "Maybe this is part of your service too," Patricia suggested. "Showing people what military men and women are capable of. Inspiring kids to pursue aviation careers. Proving that heroes really do exist." The next morning, Alex's commanding officer called. General Martinez had been following the news coverage and wanted to discuss Alex's future assignments. "Colonel Mitchell," he said, "your cover is completely blown. Every intelligence service in the world now knows who you are and what you can do. Your days of classified missions are over." Alex had expected this. "Yes, sir. What are my options?" "Test pilot school. Training command. Pentagon staff assignment. Or," the general paused, "early retirement with full benefits. You've earned it." Alex thought about her sister's wedding, about the passengers on Flight 447 who were now safely home with their families, about the young co-pilot who had discovered he was braver than he knew. Maybe it was time for a different kind of service. Patricia Mitchell's wedding was beautiful. Despite all the drama of the previous day, everything went perfectly. Alex stood beside her sister as maid of honor, wearing a simple blue dress instead of her military uniform. She'd had enough attention for one weekend. But the guests couldn't stop talking about the rescue. Half of them had seen the news coverage, and everyone wanted to hear the story from Alex herself. She kept her answers brief and modest, always directing credit to First Officer Park and the flight crew. During the reception, Alex stepped outside for some fresh air and found herself looking up at the sky. A commercial airliner was passing overhead, probably heading for Denver International Airport. She wondered if the passengers knew how much trust they were placing in their pilots, how many things had to go right to get them safely to their destination. Tom Rodriguez, the businessman who had been sitting next to her on Flight 447, approached her at the reception. He'd been invited by Patricia after learning about his connection to the story. "I still can't believe it," he said, shaking his head. "You sat next to me for 2 hours and I thought you were just shy. My wife thought you might be grieving or something." Alex smiled. "I was just trying to get to a wedding without attracting attention. Shows how well that worked out." "Can I ask you something?" Tom said. "Why didn't you say anything earlier? Even just normal conversation?" Alex thought about how to explain operational security to a civilian. "In my line of work, you learn to keep personal information private. You never know who might be listening or why they might want to know about you. It becomes a habit." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'm glad you broke that habit when it mattered." As the evening wound down, Alex found herself thinking about her future. General Martinez had given her a week to decide on her next assignment. Test pilot school was tempting. She'd always loved pushing aircraft to their limits. Training command would let her share her knowledge with the next generation of military pilots. But there was another option she was considering. Several airlines had already contacted her about joining their training programs. Commercial aviation was facing a pilot shortage, and experienced military pilots were in high demand. The idea of flying commercial aircraft full-time was growing on her. No more classified missions, no more operational security, no more hiding who she was or what she could do. Just the pure satisfaction of safely transporting people to their destinations. Patricia found her on the hotel balcony looking up at the stars. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about what comes next," Alex replied. 15 years in the military and now suddenly everyone knows who I am. "Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Patricia asked. "Maybe it's time to let people see the real Alex Mitchell instead of the classified version." Alex considered this. Her entire adult life had been about serving from the shadows, protecting people who would never know her name. But yesterday had shown her something different, the satisfaction of helping people who knew exactly what she was doing for them. The passengers on Flight 447 would remember her for the rest of their lives. Not as a classified asset or a secret weapon, but as the quiet woman who spoke up when they needed her most. Maybe that was worth giving up the secrecy. 6 months later, Captain Alexandra Mitchell was finishing her training at United Airlines Flight Training Center. The transition from military to commercial aviation had been smoother than expected. The aircraft were different, the procedures were more standardized, and the missions were refreshingly straightforward. Get passengers safely from point A to point B. She'd chosen United Airlines partly because of their response to Flight 447. The company had supported First Officer Park throughout the investigation and had implemented new training protocols based on the lessons learned from the emergency. David Park had become one of Alex's closest friends in the civilian aviation world. The experience of Flight 447 had transformed him from a competent but nervous first officer into a confident pilot who could handle any situation. He was now a captain himself, flying the same routes he'd once approached with anxiety. "You saved more than just the passengers that day," he told Alex during a training break. "You saved my career too. Before Flight 447, I wasn't sure I had what it takes to be a commercial pilot. Now I know I can handle anything." Captain Morrison had made a full recovery from his heart attack and had returned to flying after completing cardiac rehabilitation. He'd insisted on flying with Alex on her first commercial flight as captain, a symbolic gesture that had meant everything to her. "It's an honor to fly with a legend," he'd said as they prepared for departure. "But more than that, it's an honor to fly with someone who puts the mission and the passengers first always." Alex's first flight as captain was from Denver to Chicago, the reverse of the route she'd been traveling as a passenger 6 months earlier. But this time, instead of maintaining silence in the cabin, she was in command of the cockpit. As they climbed through the clouds over the Rocky Mountains, Alex reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 15 years of classified missions, countless hours of combat flying, operations she could never discuss publicly, all of it had prepared her for moments like Flight 447. But it had also prepared her for this. The quiet satisfaction of routine flights where nothing dramatic happened, where families reached their destinations safely, where the biggest challenge was weather delays or air traffic control routing. The radio crackled with a familiar voice. "United 482 Denver Center. How are things up there today, Razor?" Alex smiled and keyed the microphone. "Denver Center, United 482. Just another day at the office." But it wasn't just another day. Every flight was an opportunity to use her skills in service of others, to take responsibility for the lives entrusted to her care, to be the kind of pilot that passengers could trust completely. She traded the adrenaline of combat missions for the deeper satisfaction of protecting innocent people. Instead of engaging enemy aircraft, she was fighting weather, mechanical problems, and the routine challenges that commercial pilots faced every day. The skills were the same. The precision, the decision-making under pressure, the ability to remain calm when others panicked, everything that had made her Razor, was now being used to serve a different but equally important mission. As United 482 reached cruising altitude and the autopilot engaged, Alex looked out at the vast blue sky ahead. Somewhere below, another commercial flight might be dealing with an emergency. Another young pilot might be discovering they were braver than they knew. Another passenger might be quietly sitting in the cabin, carrying skills and experiences that could save everyone on board. The sky was full of stories waiting to be written, heroes waiting to be revealed, and ordinary people capable of extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. Alex Mitchell had learned that the most important missions weren't always the classified ones. Sometimes, the most heroic thing you could do was simply be ready when others needed you most, whether that meant breaking your silence at 30,000 feet or choosing to serve in a new way when your old mission was complete. Her call sign would always be Razor, but now it represented something different. The precision to navigate safely through routine flights, the sharpness to cut through problems before they became emergencies, and the edge that came from knowing that every passenger deserved a pilot who would never give up on getting them home safely. As Flight 482 continued its journey through the peaceful afternoon sky, Captain Alexandra Razor Mitchell settled in for what she hoped would be the most boring, routine, completely uneventful flight of her career. And that would be perfect.